Okay, let's continue our talk on neurological communication disorders. So aphasia, this is typically caused by a stroke, and it happens on the left side of the brain where language is housed, and it's a problem with language function due to localized brain damage that can affect all language modalities to varying degrees. So that means they can have trouble reading, writing, understanding language, and saying things, producing language. Okay, so you might just think, well, if you can't talk anymore, well, then maybe the person can read or they could write. That's not the case. They have varying degrees of deficits in each of these areas. Now, there's several different types of aphasia. The first type is Broca's aphasia, and this is where you have damage to Broca's area in the frontal lobe here in the left hemisphere. So we know that language is only in our left hemisphere. And this area is responsible for speech production. Okay, so when someone has problems with, has damage to this area, they have problems producing speech. So the symptoms of Broca's aphasia are the person sounds really slow and effortful, and they almost sound like a telegraph. So they're using only nouns and verbs when they talk and no grammatical morphemes. So we typically call this non-fluent speech because they're speaking at such a slow rate with a lot of pauses. And they typically have mild problems understanding speech. So they have pretty good language comprehension, but it's the production that they're having a problem with. So most people who have Broca's aphasia have paralysis or weakness on the right side of the body. So do you remember how the right side of the body the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side controls the right. Okay, excuse me. So remember the left side of the body, the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and then the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. So typically when we see someone with Broca's aphasia, we see that their right side of their body was affected. So here's an example of what it sounds like. So there's Sky David Ford, 39-year-old Coast Guardsman who suffered a stroke and had Broca's aphasia. In response to his question about work, he was a radio operator, he said, "I'm a SIG, no, man, well, again." When he asked what happened to his speech, he said, "Head, fall, Jesus Christ, me no, don't know." So they're typically very aware of their speech and language difficulties, and they get very frustrated by them. This picture is called the cookie theft picture, and it's a picture that we use quite a bit in assessment. And you can see in the picture there's a lot going on. There's water spilling on the floor, and the boy's grabbing a cookie jar and he's falling over. So we use this picture to ask people to describe what's going on, to get an assessment of their language, speech and language. And so someone with Broca's aphasia might look at this picture and say, cookie jar, fall over, chair, water, empty. Okay, so their speech is really lacking grammatical structure, and it's just these and functional words such as and here. Okay, so it's consisting almost entirely of nouns and verbs. Okay, I'll post some videos for you guys to watch, some examples. Wernicke's aphasia. So in the Wernicke's area, this is in the temporal lobe of just the left hemisphere. And we know that Wernicke's area is responsible for understanding speech. Okay, so being able to comprehend speech is in Wernicke's area. If you have damage to Wernicke's area, let's say that there is you have a stroke in that area, so there's a blockage of blood flow to that part of the brain. You may have Wernicke's aphasia, which is we refer to as fluent speech. So remember, Broca's was non-fluent, and this is fluent. So they produce speech at a normal rate without struggling to talk, but they're talking a lot, but it tends to be lacking important nouns and verbs, and it doesn't make much sense. So their speech is likely to contain neologisms, and this just means that these are nonsense words. People with Wernicke's aphasia are usually unaware of their language deficits because they have trouble understanding the speech of others, and they're unable to monitor their own speech and detect errors. So a lot of times their speech will just sound rambling and incoherent. So their ability to understand and produce meaningful language is impaired. So here's another example. Philip Gorgon, a 72-year-old butcher, had Wernicke's aphasia. In response to his question about why he was in the hospital, he said, "Boy, I'm sweating. I'm awfully nervous, you know. Once in a while I get caught up. I can't mention the Tarpui. A month ago, quite a while. I've done a lot. Well, I impose a lot. While, on the other hand, you know what I mean. I have to run around, look it over, trebin, and all that sort of stuff." So this person was speaking, he was saying this at a fluent rate, like I just read it to you, but do you know what he was saying? That's not a very good response as to why he's in the hospital. So here's that cookie theft picture again. If we had somebody with Wernicke's aphasia, they would look at it and they might say, well, this is a mother is away, here working, her working out, oh, when she's looking, the two boys looking in the other part, one of their small tile into her, time here, she's working another time because she's getting, so two boys work together, and one is sneaking around here, making his work and his further funas, his time he had. So again, not very comprehensible, but speaking at a fluent rate. So here's a picture of somebody that had damage to Wernicke's area. You can see that there was cell death that occurred here, and so this part of the brain is gone. Again, I'll post some videos for you guys to watch. Here's a patient that is looking at this picture, and listen. I would like you to listen to his description of what's going on in this picture. Can't get it to work. We will move on. Okay, the arcuate fasciculus. This is a bundle of white matter fibers, and it connects. So here's Broca's area, and here's Wernicke's area. The arcuate fasciculus is connecting these two areas. Okay, so lesions in this area, on the arcuate fasciculus, can produce conduction aphasia. Conduction aphasia is typically pretty rare. They have intact auditory comprehension, so they can understand what you're saying to them. They understand spoken words, but they have really extreme difficulty repeating what they hear because there's a disrupt in the connection between speech comprehension and speech production centers. Okay, so when they're asked to repeat something, they really have difficulty doing it. Anomic aphasia, this is where somebody has predominantly word retrieval problems. They have relatively good auditory comprehension and reading comprehension and good repetition, but their main problem is just coming up with words. And if you've ever had that feeling of, thinking of something that's on the tip of your tongue and you can't get it out, well, it's like that, but just exacerbated all the time. So if you have somebody with anomic aphasia, look at this picture. They might say something like this. This is a boy, and that's a boy, and going off pretty soon. This is a place that is mostly in, and then someone guesses the bathroom. No, kitchen. And this is a girl, and that's something that they're running, and they've got the water going down here. So they're just having word finding problems coming up with the words to describe what they're looking at. Okay, so by looking at lesion studies, when we look at what happens when there's damage to the left frontal lobe, we typically see deficits in cognitive functions. So we see people with problems with memory, attention, and perception. And when we see people that have lesions in the right hemisphere, they have a loss of their nuances of speech, so they may sound kind of monotone, or their stress and intonation may sound off. They can have impairment of emotion and intent and humor, and they may fail to get, the gist of information. Okay, traumatic brain injury, or TBI. This is head trauma that is non-focal. So that means it can be in many areas of the brain. So unlike a cerebrovascular accident or a stroke where it's localized into one part of the brain, TBI can affect all parts of the brain and can lead to motor and sensory deficits, behavioral or attention problems, and pragmatic problems. Typically, causes of TBI are car and ATV accidents, gunshots, falls, shaken baby syndrome, certain sports. We know football has a high rate of TBI. The risk factors of getting a TBI are not wearing a helmet or a seat belt or some sort of harness, not securing guns, any kind of risky behavior. SLPs typically treat people that have TBIs in hospital or specific TBI rehab units. So there's a couple different types of TBIs you can get. So this is, let's say you hit your head on a steering wheel. You have the initial impact here, and then your brain bounces back and hits the back of the brain. So this is coup and contra coup injury. You could have blunt force to the brain here. You can have hematoma, which is where the brain is starting to bleed, and it's covering a lot of different areas. Okay, cerebral palsy, CP. This is an irreversible, non-deteriorating disorder caused by some sort of irregularity in the central nervous system. So the symptoms typically affect intellect, speech, hearing, vision, and emotional control can be affected. And damage occurs before muscular coordination is attained. So this typically happens either before birth or during birth. Multiple sclerosis is another one where the myelin on the axon degenerates, and it mostly affects women 20 to 40 years old. Some of the symptoms are decreased sensation, weakness, numbness, fatigue, and the causes are unknown. But there are people that have periods of remission where the symptoms ease and then they come back.